Hi there, how's it going? Nice to see you all again. Jack Marshall here from the London Contemporary School of Piano, and on this video today I'm going to show you how to read lead sheets on piano. We're going to dive straight into this. I'm not going to make it too long. I think I'm just going to use one or two examples on how you could do this. Reading is something that has always been my Achilles heel in my musical development. So this is something that I really had to learn how to develop, and I found a system that I really found quite effective, and hopefully you will too. Remember, if you like what we do check out our free resources pack on our website, which is contemporaryschoolofpiano.com. It's got a bunch of stuff that will help with this video and any others that you may have seen, and maybe some stuff you haven't even come across yet either, so really worth checking out that. So let's waste no time, let's jump straight into it, and let's learn how to read lead sheets on piano. Right then, to start off with, we're going to be bearing in mind 4 numbers to begin with, right? And these are pretty straightforward, and those numbers are 1, 3, 5, and 7. Pretty easy, right? Now, in case you haven't already worked that out, what we're spelling out there is a 7th chord. So in C, that would be 1, 3, 5, 7. So that's C, E, G, and B for there. And what I want you to remember, we're going to be dealing with one of 2 things every time with this way of doing it, and that is you're going to be playing either a major or a minor version of this. So for now, for this particular way, if you have a minor chord, then that means the 1, 3, 5, and 7, the 3 is going to be flattened, so that's E to E flat, pretty easy there, and the 7th is going to always be the dominant 7th. You can have minor chords with the 7th as a major 7th, but that gives you a bit of a James Bond sort of sound, which we're not going to make use of today. So ignore that one. If we have a minor chord, we're always going to assume the 7th is flattened. For a major chord, it's going to be 1, 3, and 5, normal major triad, but the 7th can either be one of 2 things, and that is the major 7th or the dominant 7th. And you'll use one of the other depending on what tune you're playing and what's asked for as far as music. So those are the 2 variations, yeah? 1, 3, 5, and 7, and the 3s and the 7ths are the things that vary. So with those 4 numbers in mind, here's what we're going to be doing. Here's how you do it. What we're going to be working out first is what the outsides are doing. So what I mean by that is that the left hand is going to be taking the bass notes and the right hand will be taking the melody. So whenever you approach a new standard or lead sheet of what you're looking at, you want to work out what the outsides are doing. So usually with lead sheets, there's a stave of music and then the chords above it. So the chords above it, whatever the bass notes are for those chords, the left hand is going to be covering. So that's that. And then the melody will be covered in the right hand. So nothing will exceed those 2 things. Nothing will be lower than those bass notes, and nothing will be higher than that melody. So that's quite important. And what we look at is how to flesh out the middle of those things in between. So those 4 numbers that we're bearing in mind, it's worth remembering that the left hand is always going to be taking the 1. So 1, 3, 5, and 7, the 1 will always be here, present in the left hand, because it'll be hitting, for this particular way that we're doing it, it'll be hitting the bass notes every time, right? So the 1 will be covered. Now the melody may or may not be hitting notes, one of the 4 numbers that we mentioned. It may be hitting it, it may not be hitting it, but if it happens to hit it, then we just include the numbers we haven't used. If it isn't including any of the numbers that we're trying to keep in mind, then we have even more numbers to try and fit in the middle. So hopefully that makes sense. A lot of classical musicians that I teach sometimes, they come to me and there's this idea that all of the left hand contains the chord and all of the right hand contains melody or improvisation. But it's actually not the case with this way, right? We're using, yes, the left hand does take the bass, yes, the right hand does take the melody, but both flesh out the middle. So that's how we're going to approach this. So I'm going to make this a little bit more simpler still by giving your left hand one of maybe 3, perhaps 4 different things that it could do. So normally what I try and do here is I limit my left hand to, say, 3 or 4 shapes, right? Which will be either an octave, which is pretty straightforward. Never fails an octave. A 5th, right, which can work, although you have to be careful because it can sound a little bit medievally if you're not too careful. A 7th, now as we said, we can make that a major 7th or a dominant 7th. And you want to bear in mind where you are on the piano when you're choosing that, because if you do a major seventh down here, it can start to, sound a little bit off. Or finally, you could maybe do a third. You notice I said third last, and that's because thirds, in my own opinion, stop working so well once you get to about the first octave below middle C. You can play thirds there and it doesn't sound too bad. You play thirds here, and it starts to get towards that territory where it's a bit too muddy. So I would say use thirds, kind of sparingly a little bit here. This is not counting tenths, which is where you spread out a triad like that. But we're going to keep this relatively simple for now, right? This is obviously a lot more than we can do than what I'm about to show you. But again, just a basis and a formula that you can have to work with something. So the left hand is either roots or octaves, fifths, sevenths, dominant sevenths, or thirds, depending on where you are on the keys. So that's what the left hand's going to be doing. So the tune I want to use to demonstrate this is a very, I'm going to do the typical jazz thing and play Autumn Leaves, really common tune. Right, so everyone knows this tune, and it's a great song to actually help demonstrate this particular approach. So here's what we're going to do first. We take a look at the actual chart itself. So it's always worth just scanning over it first if you can, although that's probably an obvious thing to say. But just keep an eye if you can see any similarities. Like for example, with this tune, if you notice, once you actually learn the first two lines of this tune, you actually know more or less the entirety of the piece, because it just repeats itself again. It flips those lines over as far as harmony, and then the last couple of, it's slightly different at the end, but it's more or less consistent with the first two lines here. So that's something that you might want to bear in mind. The whole part of this is making life easier for yourself when you're reading lead sheets, and half of that might be just seeing if you can see any patterns or anything you recognize as, oh, once I learn this line, then I have this line and this line covered. Things in that nature can be very useful to make note of there. So to begin with, you want to just get the outsides, as we said, right? So we want to get the melody and we want to get the bass notes working in line with each other. So I'm not going to spend too much time doing this piece. I'm not going to play through the entirety of it. I just want to give you a quick example of how you could do this. I want to get another example in before the end of this video. I want to make it a quick one. So I'll just cover the first few bits of how you would approach this, and then you can fill in the rest yourself. So we would get the melody in the right hand. So I'm going to just speed run through this. So you'd obviously have a bit more time to work on this yourself, but you'd get the melody. It's going to be very tempting to paraphrase some of the melody. And you'll certainly find this with jazz tunes, is that the way they're written, if you were to play exactly the way it's written, it would probably sound quite boring. And it's because it would be very difficult to write out, in full swing, like the actual way you would play these. Right, so like you would, there's always this assumption that you're going to either paraphrase or slightly just make the melody a bit more, got a bit more swing to it, right? So to actually write that in literally would mean there would be pushes and ties everywhere. So it's would be a very untidy looking score. So there's this sort of unwritten rule of it's assumed that you will take the melody and do something with it, not always just play it exactly as is written for a lot of these lead sheets. So that's worth bearing in mind. So you would spend the time making sure that you get the melody played under your hands. Right, you would then put the bass notes with it and ignore the rest of the chords that you're reading. Just see the first letter of each chord and put that in the bass, and that should sound something like this. Yeah, pretty straightforward, right? Now you can do a lot with just those two things there, right? That getting the timing right with your right hand and your left hand, just playing single notes, is a very useful way to practice. See, you can do lot of facility in there just doing that. But what you want to work out now, right, is like what the numbers are that you're playing, right? So the first thing, and I should mention too, you're only going to worry about when the chords land on the first beat of the bar for this particular one, right? So you look at what you're playing, first of all, and remember those 4 numbers, 1, 3, 5, and 7. And you see if they correlate to that. So we got root, we're always going to have 1 in the left hand. So 1 is there. And the melody note is an E flat. Now we're in the context of C minor for this particular chord here. So we're playing a C and an E flat. And for a lot of you, you've probably worked out that's a C minor, like the root and the third, right? 1 and 3. So the numbers we don't have, we have 1 and 3, but we need 5 and 7. So we'll bear in mind the sort of shapes that the left hand will probably do. We don't need to do a third here. We could do a 5. So right here now we have 1, 5, and 3. We don't have a 7, which we could put there. Or here. Which doesn't sound bad, but it might be, you want to space it out and voice it kind of evenly. So the way I might do this would, I would probably go to a 7th shape in my left hand. So that's 1 and 7. 3's up here. The only note we don't have included is 5, and it's there. And now we have this sort of equal spacing. You see? And that's it. That's the whole deal right there, right? We just have to do that individually for each chord that comes across, which might sound like a bit of a task, but you'll be amazed how much this starts to snowball into being something that's a bit more muscle memory inspired and just a bit more automatic. So there we go, full chord there. That's actually the entire chord of a C minor 7, just spread out nicely. You can double up, you know, and do things like that, or if you want it to be a bit more interesting, but for the sake of getting the basics of this exercise down, try not to double up if you can. So now the next chord is an F, and we don't have any notes to sort of accompany that to begin with. So there is this open and close thing we can do in the left hand, where we go from the root and 7th to the root and 3rd. And we were here in the right hand. So the left hand has now gone to the next chord, which is the 1 and 3. We don't have a 5 or 7, and I can put them there. 7, 5, you see? And we can just keep this going. Right, so here we are. We have a B flat chord next. We have the root on the bottom, always. So that's 1. We have the melody, which is again 3, right? So there's a bit of a motif going on here. So we can do the same shape again. We could put 7th in the left hand. So we're in B flat in this case now, so that's major 7. We don't have the 5, so put it there. You see? And then we can do the same move again because it's closing in. So we go into E flat. We don't have the 5th or the 7th. And there we are. You see? And you see how this works? Interesting chord here. So we have A, melody note of C. So again, 1 and 3, but this is a minor chord, so it's flat 3. We don't have a 7th. We don't have a 5. Now the 5 on this one is a flattened 5th, so we're going to go to the E and flatten it. So there it is, and we can close in on our left hand. So that's 1 and 3, 7, 5. See, we're always just keeping in those 4 numbers. Where are the numbers we haven't included? Is it even there all in the right hand? If it's not, we have more numbers to work with. If it is, then we just include the ones we haven't put in, and the same goes for the left. So just to finish that off, closes in 1 and 3, 7, 5, and then, and here we go. You see, root note, minor 3rd, 7th, 5th. So the whole thing. You see? So it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? You get what the outsides are doing first, which might be necessary for you. So you just do bass notes and melody notes. That should keep you busy for a little while. And then you include the numbers that you haven't already played in the middle there. And that's it. That's essentially the whole deal. That whole thing is just working that system in that way. And I think you'll find that you'll be able to work through a huge chunk of any lead sheets you ever come across using this particular approach. So we're going to quickly move on to another tune. It's a tune I love using to help demonstrate this rule, but also it happens to be one of my favorite ballads ever as well. It's a ballad called But Beautiful. Very beautiful ballad, if you have a chance to listen to it. And we're going to be applying the same approach to it, right? So the first thing to do is to just look at the score and scan over it and see if we can find any patterns or similarities within it. So depending on the score you're looking at, this particular one though, if we took a look, so if you look at the first two bars of this tune, for example, we have a G major 7 moving into a B minor 7 flat 5 to an E7 flat 9. So if we just look at it that for the moment, we've got a solid chord for one bar, and then the next bar is two chords to the bar, and it's a 2-5 movement. And we can tell that for a few reasons, one of them being that the following bar after that is actually the one of that 2-5 movement, right? So we have a B, E, and an A. If you're not sure how 2-5-1s work, we have actually covered this quite a lot in some previous videos within the channel, so go check those out. Or you would be absolutely more than welcome to check out our website for the free resources pack, which will include a lot of this stuff. Loads of 2-5-1 stuff in there. So that's contemporaryschoolofpiano.com. Ask for the free resources pack. It will include some of that in there as well. So if we just look at those first two bars, we have G major 7, and then we have a B to an E. If we look at the next two bars, we have a solid chord, this A minor 7, and then we have this C sharp 7, C sharp minor 7 flat 5 to an F sharp 7 flat 9. Nastier key, but same movement. Solid chord, 2-5 movement. Next two bars, solid chord, 2-5 movement afterwards. Next two bars, G major 7. 2-5 movement after that. You see, so there is a pattern going on here. There's some kind of harmonic motif happening here, yeah? So where we start with one chord to a bar, then the next bar rather is a 2-chord bar, and it's a 2-5 shape. Same thing again for the next one. Solid chord for the first bar, next bar then 2-5 shape, 2 chords to a bar. Same thing again for the next two, you see? So there's a pattern within that. So that's scanning the piece in itself, right? Just without actually playing anything yet. Then we do what we did in the first place. We get the outside sorted, right? So we get the melody and we get the bass notes. So we, I won't play this entire thing, but like just to give you a sense of the melody. You see? And then we put the bass note to it. Okay, sounds quite bare, but again, important part of the process if you're new to this. So we have the outsides established, and the ideal situation would be that you could play through the entire song like that, yeah? So the next bit now is to work out what numbers we have not included, right? So if we look at the first bit, we have a root note, which will always be there, remember. 1 is there. And then we have a melody note. Now, the melody note, and this is why I like this tune, it doesn't actually include one of the 4 numbers, right? We're playing an A. Now, in G is our first chord, so that's 1, 3, 5, and 7. A is not a part of that number. It's actually the 9th, or the 2, right? We'll call it the 9th for now. And so we have more numbers to play with now. Bearing in mind the left hand's going to be doing one of 3 things, maybe 4, depending on where it is. So I'm going to do this. We'll work out what the numbers are first themselves. So it's root and 9. We don't have a 3rd, we don't have a 5, we don't have a 7. Now we could chuck them all there, but then it just sounds too muddy, right? So we want to spread them out nicely. So we've got root and the 9. So I'm going to try putting my 7th here, my 5th here, and my 3rd I could either put here, which would be a bit too low. Again, you see, 3rd's working too far down the piano, stops to work as nice. However, if I put it here, all of a sudden I have a very nice opening chord. See? Lovely sound. Now, this next part. Whoops, sorry, it's a B natural there. So, we've got the root, and we actually have, now the chord reads flat 5, and the melody is what that flat 5 is. So that's exactly why the chord is written as a flat 5, right? It's not a coincidence. So we have the root and the 5th, which is a flat 5th. We'll just structure this out. We don't have the 7, we don't have the 3rd, and that could be good enough. Right? That's all the numbers, that's all the ones that we need. You see? Works perfectly well. Now we go into an E7 chord after this. Now I'm going to keep everything in my right hand the same and just close in on my left hand. Because what happens when I do that, we're going from this B to B7 shape into an E chord, which is like a root and 3rd. And because it's a 2-5 movement, this open and close thing is always available. I should talk about that in another video perhaps. But yeah, this open close thing, it really works like that. So we're moving from a 7th shape to a 3rd shape. And by keeping the numbers, keeping the notes that we had in the previous chord, these now turn from being what was once a 3rd and flat 5th into now a 7th and flat 9, which is exactly the chords that it wants. We have a root, 3rd, 7th, 9th. The only number we don't have is the 5th, which we can put in there if we want, right? So that whole thing so far. You see? And that's it. Keep it moving. So we have a melody note of a B and a bass note of a A. And it's the same thing again. Look, it's the 9th. It's the 9 chord. It's the 9 note rather. So again, there's a motif going on within the melody and the harmony as well. We'll just structure it the same way as we did last time. We'll make it a 7th, minor 7 this time. We don't have the 3rd, don't have the 5th. It's all there. And look, it's going to be the same movement again, right? It's a 2-5 movement. So here it comes. So it's a C sharp with a flat 5. Here's the flat 5. And here's the bass note. We don't have a 7th. We do not have a 3rd. And that's all of the numbers we need. So it's root, 7, 3rd, flat 5. And the move that we did earlier for the previous 2-5 shape should be exactly the same. You see? Open, closed, and that's going from 1 and 3. Works there. It's a 3rd shape, I know, which we talked about earlier, but it's high enough for it to work. And by keeping these two, you've ended up keeping the value of the notes that we had last time, right? Which is, we've got the flat 9 and the 7th. The only one we don't have is the 5th, which we could put in there. So it's exactly the same movement. So we put all of that together. You see? Next chord, the root note is on the bass note of G. We actually have a melody note of the D, which is the 5th, so we don't need to worry about the 5. We don't have the 3rd. Interesting one. There's the 3rd, there's the 7th. It's quite an open, wide shape, that is, isn't it? So this is maybe where I would consider doubling up a little bit just to fill in that space, because technically we've done everything right there. But look at all of this gap in the middle of that. So I might double up on a few things. I might hit a 7th again, maybe even reach down to there, or I could even play a 10th in my left hand if I have the physicality to be able to do that. You see, so that's root 5, 3rd, beg your pardon, melody note 7th, and then I could add more numbers. Again, we're only considering the first 4 numbers here, right? We haven't talked about using 9s or 11s or 13s yet. They're all something that we can apply eventually. But for this particular way of doing this, I think this would be really effective. So I really recommend just trying to do this with whatever tunes you're doing. You know, you just kind of you're working your way through, um, keeping in mind those 4 numbers at the start, and just getting the outsides right first, so you get the melody and the bass, and then you just include all of the numbers that you haven't included within that, and then you will have a, albeit maybe slightly simple but effective way of playing any lead sheets that you come across this way. And that's it. That's essentially the whole game there. It's just those elements involved where we have a bit of a checklist. You know, we scan over it. We get the outsides correct, so we get the left and right hand working. And then we flesh out the middle with the numbers that we're trying to keep in mind there. This may not be the finished article that you want. This may be something you want to use to build from. But as far as a system where it's relatively straightforward and simple, you may find that it's enough to get you through reading most lead sheets. It was in my case anyway. So I'm hoping that will just give you something to use when it comes to reading stuff for the first time. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I think that will be enough for this one. I do hope that it was useful for some of you, and that it gives you something that you can use when you're looking at reading some new stuff. I appreciate very much you sticking around and watching the whole thing, and just to say as well that I've noticed some lovely comments on some previous videos as well, so I just want to say thank you very much for everyone leaving those, and I'm really glad that these videos are helpful for you, and that it helps you learn some stuff. So that's great news for me. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you on the next one, and we'll keep on learning some stuff. So thank you very much again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks very much. Cheers.